Now, we did look at the Constitution last time. Um, so now the Constitution doesn't say anything about the United States being asked to create federal Indian law. No, but the Supreme Court went ahead and created federal Indian law. Where in the Constitution does it say that one of the enumerated functions of the United States is to create federal Indian law? Doesn't. They had 19 enumerated functions that were limited to their citizens. American Indians are not citizens. So we just want to always look at the unprecedented authority that the United States continues to take over American Indians, seeing them in federal Indian law as wards. Yeah, wards. We say that all the time because it's the truth. As blacks, you're still no better off. You're no better off than wards as blacks as well. Because the idea is you are always seen as a slave, as a quote unquote black. As an Indian, they also magically turned indenturehood into slavery as well. So you have American Indians being seen as slaves, and you have these imaginary African Americans being seen as slaves. So when you're seen as a slave in this English system, it is presumed that you're not in a position to, for instance, write down your Bill of Rights. You're just the property that came with the seized land. You don't get a say. You've been made slaves by the papal bull known as Dum Diversis. So, federal Indian law arose from a combination of the US Constitution. Well, again, we just said, where in the Constitution does it say that the federal government is been given the enumerated function of creating federal Indian law? It doesn't. But they're saying it's that their federal Indian law arose from a combination of the U.S. Constitution, early international law, law of nations. Well, you said we're not really a foreign nation, really. We're domestic dependent. You made that up as well, though. The Constitution doesn't say anything about domestic dependence. It says, with the Commerce Clause says we are considered a foreign nation, like among, you know, like the states, foreign nations, and Indian tribes, but it didn't say we were domestic dependent. How did the United States create this notion of domestic dependence? They created it magically from the doctrine of discovery. Anything that's not found in the Constitution, This government took the liberty to make it up based on the doctrine of discovery. Now, the thing is, the doctrine of discovery doesn't have any language about federal Indian law. It doesn't have any language about domestic dependent. The United States has given itself the liberty to create anything it wants, even the idea of wards. That's not in the Constitution, but it's in the Supreme Court uh, case. One of the John Marshall cases, Judge John Marshall, a very creative Supreme Court justice. He just made up stuff as he sat there. Uh, I guess he made it up before he actually took, the bench to deliver these off the cuff uh, laws. Can you imagine, ladies and gentlemen, you walk into a court and there is no set of laws set for this judge to go by. He makes it up as you go along. This is what happened. He's saying he based it on the doctrine of discovery, but the doctrine of discovery does not have this language that he's making up. I mean, if he's saying that it's based on the doctrine of discovery, what he really should be saying is, I have a right to make you a permanent slave. But he won't say that, ladies and gentlemen. He doesn't spell it out. But the result is the same. As a ward, you are still being told what to do like a slave. Decisions are being made for you without your agreement or consent. So I ask you again, ladies and gentlemen, who out there thinks that Indians had some kind of business deal with the United States? It's not possible. You don't do business with slaves unless it's the business of perhaps the closest thing we would get is how they do in the prison system. Now, those men are incarcerated, but they are involved in some kind of commerce, but it's a slavery type of deal. They are made to work while they're in the prison system. They're not getting paid what anyone outside of prison would be getting paid. It amounts to slavery. That is what Indians are basically in. Because it's not a two-way type of conversation. It's the United States making up your laws, and you have no say because the judge said so. Okay, that's how it is, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Okay, so early international law, law of nations. So they calling it international, but they're saying we're domestic dependent, so we're not really like a real nation. So they just do whatever. They can put you in where you don't belong. They can make up laws. The United States have complete authority over the entities. They have misclassified Negro, colored, black. They also have the same authority over American Indians because of the doctrine of discovery. Actually, the doctrine of discovery is what allowed them to turn American Indians into blacks. So It's a very intricate deception, ladies and gentlemen, because the doctrine of discovery gave them go ahead. I can't say it was legal, but they will say this was legal. Doctrine of discovery gave them the legal go ahead to take the lands of American Indians. But because they're putting on a mask of piety, I guess, they won't outright say that we can take American Indians' land. They won't say that. What do? They try to say we're from Africa. This system is one of the saddest, most wretched systems, depraved. It won't even stand in what it is operating from. If you are using the doctrine of discovery, just say you are. And but the misclassification, why that? Why that though? It's like you know that this is all ratchet. You're not bold enough to say that your doctrine of discovery said you could steal the land of American Indians. You go and make it like they're from Africa. And see, ladies and gentlemen, it's not even consistent because you're taking the land of Indians because the doctrine of discovery said you could. But if you say we're from Africa, this is not our land that you're taking. But that's what they wanted. Make it look like they're not stealing the land. Oh, we brought you here from Africa. The doctrine of discovery didn't say take people from another land and pretend that uh, you're not stealing. It just said you can take American Indians' land. But this system is so punk ass, really. And then it's like a bully. It don't want to face the truth of what it did. So it's just living in a lie. How could that be godly to choose to live in a lie and never want to tell the truth? So federal Indian law arose from a combination of the U.S. Constitution. No wording in the Constitution says that they can do federal Indian law. In fact, it says Indians not taxed are not supposed to be under the United States. But that again, ladies and gentlemen, was a mislead because they knew that they could take over, and they did. They put that little Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 in the Constitution to make themselves look good with no intention of going by that article. So this is why we really want to eradicate the whole fraud, because if you're not going by the Constitution, why is it there? You're going by the doctrine of discovery, and that's what we're going to have to deal with as American Indians. This whole system is here because of the doctrine of discovery, not because we invited them. So federal Indian law magically arose from the U.S. Constitution that doesn't say anything about federal Indian law. Early international law, well, if we're not seen as a full nation, I don't know why they would use international law. They're just lying again. They're making up some special international law because I assure you, no one else is agreeing to be, no other nation would agree to be dominated in commerce by the United States if they're a sovereign nation. So I don't know why they have us as part of international law. We're the only ones getting royally dominated. No other nation would agree to that in international law. So they're saying federal Indian law came from the U.S. Constitution. international law, and a foundational trio of 19th century Supreme Court decisions known as the Marshall Trilogy. This is where they made up federal Indian law. Namely, this is what the United States did, you know, uh, off the cuff. They just made it up. Okay. Together, these authorities establish the federal government. Now, mind you, ladies and gentlemen, in all of those, Indians do not have a say. This is the United States applying international law to us, making up a something that's not in the Constitution, and then a Supreme Court making up more words and terms that are not found in the Constitution. So, ladies and gentlemen, when you hear me say we don't want to go by the Constitution as American Indians, we never did. We were never uh, governed by the Constitution. We were governed by the doctrine of discovery. And in that quote unquote government, we didn't have a say because we're wards. Okay? Together, these authorities established that the federal government, not the individual states, holds exclusive authority to manage relations with Native American. There they go, using it goes from Indian to Native American in the wink of an eye, when they know damn well there was no such thing as Native Americans until 1960s. They were talked about in the 1960s. Then some kind of law with that word Native American came in 1975. Bill legislation came in 1990 something. There's no such thing as Native Americans, but they will. This is the United States. They can do whatever they want with the doctrine of discovery. Change words, make up words, redefine words, while simultaneously recognizing the tribe's inherent pre-existing sovereignty. Well, that's a laugh. You're dominating them completely from three different vantage points. You won't even take the responsibility onto yourself because you're the only thing dominating. It's the federal government, not international law. It's the federal government just applying it where they want it to apply. And so that's not really official. And the Supreme Court, we already said, the John Marshall just made up shit. This is not government, ladies and gentlemen. This is just pure on the spot, do as I will domination. There's no set of laws that they're drawing from, ladies and gentlemen. They have an overall edict from the doctrine of discovery to do whatever the hell you want to do. And then that's a big diving board, ladies and gentlemen. They can do whatever they want. You're not protected as American Indians. They just got to make it look good. But we just know as American Indians who have been misclassified by the federal government into Negroes, coloreds, and blacks, we know what they how they treat those entities, right? But it amounts to a genocide of American Indians, intentional. It's their sifting us out and turning us colored. So I'm seeing going on here. Focus on American Indians. It's like day to day, they're just all over the place. Forget a three-ring circus. Try a 300-ring circus. It's just distraction after distraction after distraction. And not once have American Indians misclassified black been even mentioned in all this? We get so they keep a narrative going that has you talking about everybody else but yourself. And so they're basically asking you to ignore your plight. Let's focus on the great, horrible things we're doing to other people. Or let's pretend that we're getting rid of quote unquote illegal aliens. How could they be illegal when you brought them here? You encouraged them to come here. They didn't just come on their own. You had them coming in at the borders. You didn't do nothing. And then you call them illegal? Okay, so constitutional authority. The U.S. Constitution explicitly shifts authority over native affairs away from the states and consolidates it within the federal government. So you are, as an American Indian, directly under the corporation. Directly. They said, stand aside, states. Let Big Daddy at 'em. Give me my wards, my slaves. So here, ladies and gentlemen, it's all about the Constitution, right? Constitutional authority, blah, blah, blah. Why, ladies and gentlemen, do they not mention Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3? Indians are mentioned in that clause. Why do they jump to the Commerce Clause, ladies and gentlemen? Because Indians not taxed are not supposed to be under the United States for them to be making any federal Indian law or international law or Supreme Court decisions. They jump to the Commerce Clause because that's where they decided that they have quote unquote plenary authority, which is not in the Constitution. So, ladies and gentlemen, when I say we need to ditch the Constitution, it's because they never used it with American Indians. So for us to go back to it, it's like trusting your person that broke into your house has this document called the Constitution. It sounds really wonderful, but he's holding it in his hand as he steals your entire continent. So we're asking ourselves, did the Constitution ever protect us? No, no, it didn't. It didn't. It made us wards. It made us enemies of the state. So it gave itself a reason to see us at enmity with it. But you came to my home. I didn't come to you to disturb you. I didn't come to your home to displace you. You came here and you're making me your enemy, but again, that's all you. I'm your enemy because you came to me as a thief, not because I am uh, just willing to be your enemy. I had no choice because you came to take, and then you say that I'm just occupying the land of my ancestors. Are you nuts? Are you stupid? So, ladies and gentlemen, they go to the Constitution, but they jump Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. We looked at that last video. Indians not taxed, not counted, not represented. Where is that, ladies and gentlemen? When they go to say that they have authority over us, They can't use Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 because it doesn't speak to them having any authority because we're not represented. This was supposed to be a representative type of situation, but this is from England, so it turns out to be a forked tongue type of thing. Little things I guess monarchs do to steal uh your land and to presume to have some authority by some deity over you. They jump to the Commerce Clause. What happened to Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, the Indian Not Tax Clause, ladies and gentlemen? They've been ignoring it ever since they wrote it. So they go to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, which we got that wrong in the last video. I think we said Article 1, Section 3, Clause 8. It's actually Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. Pardon. So they're saying the Commerce Clause grants Congress the express power to regulate commerce with the Indian tribes. Now, when you read that, ladies and gentlemen, it sounds like it's a mutual thing or some like a shared thing to regulate commerce with the Indian tribes. Further, courts have interpreted this as granting Congress plenary, complete, broad, and exclusive power over tribal affairs. So the Commerce Clause was supposed to be about Indians having land, yeah, in order to have resources to sell in commerce to the states. But the federal government reimagined this to mean that they have just complete authority over us like a guardian to a ward. It went from being about commerce to just outright total domination magically. Why? Again, they're using the doctrine of discovery. They're so much so that they're going beyond what the Constitution seems to be saying and is saying. We don't have any land, we can't have commerce, ladies and gentlemen. To have commerce, nation to nation, the idea is that other nation has resources that you don't have, and you have resources that the other nation doesn't have. But because the United States took every square inch of our land, ladies and gentlemen, they don't have to buy anything from us. They just go and take what they want from every state. They might make a deal with a state, but that has nothing to do with American Indians. You have been cut out of commerce with this quote unquote plenary authority, a word that's not even in the Constitution, ladies and gentlemen. The Commerce Clause doesn't say anything about authority. It just says something about regulating commerce with foreign nations, the states, and with Indian tribes. But you'll find that this system, they only speak of civilized tribes. When they say tribes, they actually mean civilized tribes. But the civilized tribes are not even involved in commerce because their reservations actually belong to the United States. With the guardian type of relationship, the state, I mean, I'm sorry, the reservation actually still belongs to the United States because they say you're just occupying the land. It's not yours. Even as a tribe, you're just occupying the land. And you can be dissolved if the United States wants to dissolve you. Now, imagine if the United States could just call itself dissolving Germany or dissolving Russia or dissolving China. Is the United States allowed to dissolve uh, actual nations? No, it's not. But they took that authority over Indian tribes. So you're only here at the whim of your master, the United States, because they are doing the most based on what? Not the Constitution, but the doctrine of discovery. So again, ladies and gentlemen, our argument with the United States in a peaceful manner is that why bother going back to the Constitution? You've breached the Constitution, you've discarded it, and because we see how you act, we want nothing to do with anything you created. So we don't try to say that, oh, well, now you have to go by the Constitution and we'll just be better. But you don't belong here. We didn't ask you to come here. And stop acting like we did. We have a right to not be genocided, United States, and all you do is genocide us. You antagonize us. These big displays of police brutality, a guy defending himself in a stand your ground state gets 35 to life for defending himself. And Indians, you don't understand that this is all because they're not going by the Constitution with you. They're looking at you as slaves. A master does not get punished be, uh, for abusing his slave. Okay? That's why you're not getting justice. You're getting, let's throw them this so they can shut up for Christ's sake. Okay, so the Indian Commerce Clause. What happened to the Indian Not Tax Clause? They don't have to look at that. A whole constitution, and they're taking the liberty to ignore a part of the Constitution. They prefer to look at us as things they can dominate in commerce. The treaty found in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. Didn't they say they just stopped making treaties? That's another liberty they took. So I don't even know why they're talking about the treaty clause. They stopped doing treaties. They stopped this, and they didn't ask anybody if they were okay with that. They just went ahead and stopped doing treaties. I believe it was 1877, I think. We don't want to do treaties anymore because a treaty with a ward, when you automatically get to tell them what to do, no need for a treaty. You just do as I say, and I want to keep that wide open. A treaty would limit that, but you're a ward, so you don't need no treaties. But they're going to say this is what gives them authority. Yeah, and they took so much authority that they don't do treaties with American Indians anymore because they're not looking at you like a separate nation. You're a defeated, dominated nation. This is your republic for those alleged American Indians who are batting for a republic. This is your republic we're talking about, okay? I don't know what one you imagine, exist in the windmills of your mind, your Moroccan mind. This is all your republic right here, ladies and gentlemen. And you think that they're going to do something for you? I guess you don't understand what colonization, what that was about. You keep thinking colonization is a business deal. When you're being colonized, that's not a business deal. Different if we weren't colonized. Maybe you could say this is some kind of business deal, but I still don't see how it would be when you don't have any land that's exclusively yours. Because this beast is so damn greedy, it's just sucking up all your resources for itself. You're what put the great in Great Britain, nothing else. Trust and believe. So the treaty clause, found in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, this gives the executive branch the authority to negotiate treaties. Negotiate? Oh no, you don't negotiate with American Indians. You tell them what they're going to do. That's what you do. You don't have to listen to your wards. Your federal Indian law, Judge John Marshall declared that we are wards, like wards. So negotiate? No, no, you're just saying that. You're just, once again, just talking to sound good, right? Because treaties are considered the supreme law of the land. No, they're not. You stop doing them. You pick and choose what treaties you're going to honor. So why even bother? This solidified a government to government relationship between the U.S. and tribal nation. Oh, give me a break. You just said that they're domestic dependent. So how can they be a government if they're dependent? What government is dependent on another government? Where? I mean, how it's done in the Americas, I mean. Governments are supposed to have land. If you have a government, you have to have land, ladies and gentlemen, or else you're not a government. And this beast does not, I told you Moors don't share, right? They just take all of your shit and play games with you. So, ladies and gentlemen, so far everything we've read, it's dressing, it's window dressing because this United States, what it's going by is something that simply says you can do whatever you want if you find heathen nations or heathen people. But the idea is we are seen as their permanent slaves. So all of this treaties and commerce and blah, 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 your slave is there to work for you. There is no commerce. He works for free and you collect all the profits. Okay? I don't know what dream these civilized minded Indians are in. They really need to wake up. International law of nations. Well, I don't know how we got into that when we're not a nation. We're not, as a matter of fact, are Indians in the United Nations? Well, they say the civilized tribes are, but we've come to realize that they must be in that room down the hall in the United Nations. That, that part of the United Nations that no one even really knows about. It's probably used to be like a custodian closet. And that's where they have something going on with the Washita that nobody else knows about, the secret files in the United Nations. Um, because even the United Nations has to know that these civilized tribes are just they're just wards. How can you be part of the United Nations and you're not a nation, you're a ward? So the United Nations did some janky shit. I just think they took part in fraud because you could hear the civilized tribes talk, "Oh, we got a treaty with the United Nations." That shit ain't real. You do you understand that you are wards? And furthermore, you're not really American Indians. You're Moors that just dominated some converted Algonquins who didn't know what you were up to, but they just roll with you because you sound like you know what you're talking about. And you do because all you talk about is basically having us under the thumb of our colonizer because you are the colonizer. The Moors are colonizer. And he does not have a birthright here. That's why we are going through all these damn shifty, shady shenanigans. Because what it boils down to is they have to diminish you because you have a birthright. So that's why you were misclassified. That's why they're not really going by the Constitution when it comes to you. They're going by the doctrine of discovery because the doctrine of discovery says if you come to a land, so that means we were already here, right? The way they're treating us, clearly they didn't bring us here because the doctrine of discovery wouldn't really apply. The doctrine of discovery deals with taking land from a people. So as Africans, if we were Africans brought to the Americas, they wouldn't use the doctrine of discovery because they wouldn't have to, because we don't have no land. The reason why they're using the doctrine of discovery against misclassified American Indians is because the land is yours and they know that you are the authority, whether you're a heathen or not. So they're kind of telling on themselves because why would you use the doctrine of discovery on colored people if the land was not theirs? You wouldn't need the doctrine of discovery because they're from Africa. But you misclassified Indians into colored. And so then you just proceed to terrorize the coloreds because you know they're American Indians and you're seizing their land just like the doctrine of discovery said you could. Early American jurists did not invent federal Indian law from scratch. They heavily, now I hope you're listening, they heavily adopted 18th century European. Euro what? So American jurists adopted European international law? So you have American Indians under European international law? That should not apply to me because I'm not European? Oh, how unfortunate, I guess. So you're bringing international law, your law. You're a colonizer and you're using your international law as if it's a non-biased entity? Oh, specifically thinkers like Emer de Vattel argued that a weaker nation could place itself under the protection of a more powerful empire. But we didn't do that. You did that. You did that. So you were a complete idiot to argue that a weaker nation could place itself. Did we have a choice, Mr. Vattel? Just a bunch of liars. I mean, goodness, just tell the truth. So specifically, thinkers like Emer D. Vattel argued that a weaker nation could place itself under the protection of a more powerful empire. But it's the quote unquote powerful empire where we're most unprotected without entirely surrendering its internal sovereignty or right to self-government. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a crock of crap because they're trying to say that tribes have sovereignty over only their tribes, not the foreign invaders on their land. They get to do whatever the hell they want. So it's like a double standard here. These foreigners talk like Indian tribes have authority, but they are holding all the power. So you're telling me that I only have power over my tribe that I really don't have when you're here because you have authority over that too. But you're saying that is the that is the width and the breadth of my power, alleged quote unquote power, only over my tribes. But you have authority over every citizen that comes here and me in my tribe. So how did that happen? Why does your authority bleed over into mine, but mine doesn't bleed over yours because you're a colonizer? That's it? That's just that the answer like that. That's just it like that. You just got it like that. Oh, because of the doctrine of discovery. But then you try to say it's not the doctrine. Well, where is it coming from? Exactly is your authority coming from, United States? It's coming from the doctrine of discovery. Let's not play this game. Let's not play the game. I know you'd like us to believe that you're the great and mighty, powerful Oz, and your authority just comes from the universe. Unfortunately, that's not the truth, is it? Your authority is coming from the doctrine of discovery that you heavily rely on to make up laws on the spot. How can a people be governed and they don't even know what law you will pull out of a hat? Well, because they're slaves. You get to do whatever you want with slaves. Judicial authority, the Marshall Trilogy. Between 1823 and 1832, Supreme Court Justice John Marshall made up three pivotal opinions based on nothing constitutional and everything doctrine of discovery that legally defined the status of tribes within the United States. Oh, it did, huh? Status. Johnson versus McIntosh, 1823, adopted the European doctrine of discovery. They're telling you right there, ladies and gentlemen, where they're grabbing their authority from. That should have said the Constitution, right? It should have been so. If we, well, that's just it. We were not supposed to be governed by the Constitution, but because they keep talking about the Constitution, why? When it's the doctrine of discovery where you're doing the most, you're taking the most liberty with the doctrine of discovery. That's why you're not even addressing Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. That's the Constitution. You'd rather go to something outside of the Constitution that allows you to ignore Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. Right, Judge John Marshall? So in Johnson versus McIntosh, The judge adopted the European doctrine of discovery, ruling that European discovery gave the U.S. government absolute, can we say that again, ladies and gentlemen? Absolute legal title to the land. So it's not, the United States is not how they got our land. The United States Constitution is not. It is the doctrine of discovery. That's why American Indians don't have 1 square inch of land that is under their authority. This thing took it all, and yet calling us a separate government with no land, a separate government on their land. That is how they look at it. That's very laughable. So Johnson versus McIntosh, we talk about these Marshall trilogy cases all the time. Um, they weren't supposed to make any laws for us, but because of the doctrine of discovery, they ended up making laws, some of the worst laws for us, right? So the Supreme Court case, Johnson versus McIntosh, John Marshall said that the United States government has absolute legal title to the land, reducing tribal ownership to a right of occupancy. So you don't own your tribal land. Everything is owned by the United States. They have absolute legal title in their, according to their world. Indians have to challenge this in a, what do you call it? Peaceful, quote unquote, civil manner. You don't have to go to their courts as the true owners of the land. Old court. Um, so our ownership as American Indians is just now reduced to a right of occupancy. That's very sketchy because you really don't have that right either. That could only be sold or ceded to the federal government. You can only sell your land to the federal government. Greedy motherfuckers. Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, 1831. Defined tribes not as foreign nations, but as domestic dependent nations. Marshall described the federal tribal relationship, uh-oh, as resembling that of a ward to his guardian. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That judge described our tribes not as foreign nations, but as domestic dependent nations. That's because we don't have any land. So we're depending on him, I don't know, uh, deciding what we can do on the land. Marshall described the federal tribal relationship as resembling that of a ward to his guardian, which gave rise to the federal trust responsibility. So that's why they have a trust, because they look at us as wards. So when we stand up and say we're not wards, no need for a trust. Just let it all go. We're not paying taxes. Yeah. And we need our land, all of it. So Marshall described the federal tribal relationship as resembling that of a ward to his guardian, which gave rise to the federal trust responsibility, the legal obligation of the U.S. to protect tribal lands and assets. Please. That's not what you're doing. You're saying it's yours, protecting anything. Worcester versus Georgia, 1832, clarified that tribal nations are distinct political communities where state laws have no force. This firmly established that only the federal government has jurisdiction in Indian country. So they're asserting themselves. They're not supposed to have jurisdiction over Indians, period. If they ever went by the Indian not tax clause. So they're dominating you without representation of American Indian, or they're trying to. Civilized tribes are okay with this. They're okay with this. And they want this for everybody. But as an American Indian, you don't have to take this. You can stand in your authority. You have every right to. Now, the civilized tribe, they want to be dominated. Let them remain dominated. But their republic won't apply to American Indians. We don't have to go by a republic. We were here before the republic, so we don't have to go by the republic. Inherent tribal sovereignty. This is just a crock of shit. Crucially, federal Indian law recognizes that the ultimate authority for tribal self-governance does not come from the United States. The Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed that tribal sovereignty is inherent. They'll say that, ladies and gentlemen, but they're not going by that. This is what Peter Dorico always talks about. The attorney that always has said that the United States is just dominating Indians. It's not a nation to nation, none of that. It's a guardian and a ward, period. So the Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed the tribal sovereignty is inherited, meaning it predates the creation of the United States. Well, they can't deny that, so that's why they must accept it, but they're not accepting it really, right? The Constitution and European colonization. So we predate the creation of the United States. We predate the creation of the Constitution, so we don't have to go by that either. And European colonization. We predate as Algonquins, we do. Not so much with Iroquois and the five civilized tribes. They popped up after colonization. So when they say we predate the United States, the Constitution, and European colonization, they're really talking about Algonquins, ladies and gentlemen. And remains intact except where explicitly limited by federal treaty or state statute. I'm sorry. If you would like to explore this topic further, blah, blah, blah. No, 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 no. Okay, so we got to the end of this basically, but we did have a second part. So we asked the question about the doctrine of discovery, and the answer came back. The doctrine of discovery is the foundational legal fiction that allowed European empires and later the United States to claim legal title to indigenous lands. It directly explains how the U.S. justified asserting federal Indian law over sovereign nations that had never consented to American rule. You see, we never agreed, we never consented. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break and come right back. We have just one more page. This is the third page. So let's get through that and come right back. I mean, well, come right back and get through that. Thank you. We're back. And let us finish this document. It's just a little upkeep, a little Indian upkeep. So again, we asked the second question. This was AI, it wasn't ChatGPT. So it didn't pull the question. But after we discussed where the United States, I should say, gets its authority from, we realized that AI didn't really go in. to talk about the doctrine of discovery. So we had to ask AI to uh, please speak to the doctrine of discovery's influence on the United States. And she did. So that's why we highlighted in yellow with red lettering, because here we find that the United States, this is the doctrine that gave it our land, ladies and gentlemen. The Constitution is just window dressing, but the real document that brought the United States here is the doctrine of discovery. When we read, thank you, AI, the doctrine of discovery is the foundational legal fiction that allowed European empires and later the United States to claim legal title. Now, when they say European empires, first it was the British monarchy that really did the yeoman's work of creating states on our land. So this is why AI is saying that allowed European empires and later the United States. So now the United States breaks away from Britain and turns around but perhaps we could say 100,000 times worse. What Britain didn't do to the United States was try to genocide them. The United States is involved in a genocide of American Indians. Now, again, the British nobility, they did not want to genocide their colonists. They needed them. But the colonists are involved in genociding American Indians. And so you wonder, well, what happened to Britain in all of this? Um, I think we can safely say that all of this leads back to Britain. Okay. Remember, the United States is the District of Columbia that is said to be owned by Britain. So what happened is Britain took direct authority over American Indians aside from the states. So that's how Britain remained. It's like the states said, well, we don't want you to dominate us, but could you handle these Indians? And Britain said, why, certainly. And so we became the money bag for Britain. The District of Columbia is the 10 square mile entity that is said to be a British territory, whereas the states are, well, they're created by Britain, so they might not be directly owned by Britain, you might say, but because they are creations of Britain, Britain certainly retains power, creative authority over the states. So American Indians are pretty effectively the new subjects of the Britain. It's like but she sort of still grabbed her citizens back as well because they have a dual citizenship. They are part slave and part subject. Because I don't really see citizens as sovereigns, ladies and gentlemen. Because again, they did not create the states and they can't create the states. You know, their nobility created the states for them. So if you're standing in the creation of your monarchy, uh, I have some bad news for you. Now, American Indians are standing here because of our ancestors. We will always have what the United States thinks it has in a legal fiction type of way. We will always have real title, actual title. Britain and any foreigner, they have a legal fiction. That's why they like to make everything into commerce, because commerce is a fiction. It's a masquerade ball. But real men and women own real land, and then whoever wants to create a fiction compensate American Indians for that. Ongoing compensation. So, the doctrine of discovery is the foundational legal fiction that allowed European empires and later the United States to claim legal title to indigenous lands, to American Indians' lands. It directly explains how the U.S. justified asserting federal Indian law. Did you catch that, ladies and gentlemen? Federal Indian law is nothing the Constitution named or mentions. The doctrine of discovery allows a Supreme Court to create what they call federal Indian law. Yet Indians are not supposed to be under the federal government. Well, you have to go to the doctrine of discovery to see why they are claiming American Indians as wards. So the U.S. justified asserting federal Indian law over sovereign nations that had never consented to United States rule. We never consented. Remember, I did a short lunch break video, and I said there was no consent. Did not agree to any of this. Okay? So now AI is saying it. The original papal bulls and European law. The doctrine originated in the 15th century through a series of papal decrees, papal bulls, issued by the Catholic Church. We just doing some maintenance, ladies and gentlemen. We talked about this before. I believe we even read this document before, and we're doing it again. So, the mandate, it granted Christian explorers the right to claim lands inhabited by pagans, infidels, and savages. So, what were American Indians to the British nobility and to the free persons of the United States and Congress and the Supreme Court? Pagans, infidels, and savages. To this day, no matter if we are quote unquote saved or not, because they still treat us by and large as a group, what they call a racial group, we are still being marginalized as if we're savages who never came in contact with their God or gods. The legal mechanism under the European what? Why is an American Indian under European international law? Because of the doctrine of discovery. The first Christian nation to discover an area gained absolute sovereignty and property rights over that land, regardless of the indigenous population already living there. This is what we're in, ladies and gentlemen. People think that a republic is not here because of this doctrine, and they are deluding themselves. A republic is not going to save them. A republic it's not going to be run by exclusively free persons of color, because Indians wouldn't have anything to do with this. I mean, they're going to say they're Indians, but Indians are not represented in the republic. The United States is the republic. If Indians are talking about some other republic, then it shouldn't be because there wasn't any. It only came with the United States. We would have had to have a quote unquote republic before the 1600s for it to be something that we had. If it comes after we are invaded, I regretfully inform you that it is not your republic. Oh, yeah, you had to go along with it as a free person of color or a free person initially, because there's no such thing as a free person of color in the Constitution. So you're being had again. But that means the Republic didn't mention free persons of color. It just mentioned free persons. Free persons could be black, white, anything. So the Republic was not made exclusively by or for free persons of color. Well, it was made by the Moors, which are free persons of color, but they're not American Indians. When they claim a republic, they are free persons of color. Why doesn't the Moor want American Indians to have the authority that they're supposed to have? Because that would mean you would tell the Moor where to go and how to get there. And he doesn't want that. He wants to masquerade as you and be able to walk on this land as if he's an American Indian. So does anybody else that has a brain. We'll know that he originated in North Africa, and that's where his sovereignty truly is. It is not here in the Americas. Here in the Americas, American Indian hold that position of the authority on the land, the authorities on the land. So the mandate, it granted Christian explorers the right to claim lands inhabited by pagans. Ladies and gentlemen, to this system, the legal mechanism. Under this European international law, the whole international law system is European, by the way. The first Christian nation to discover an area gained absolute sovereignty and property rights over that land, regardless of the indigenous population already living there. They had a right to steal. Integration into American law, into United States law. Johnson v. McIntosh. So it's reiterating what we already read, but it's showing how the doctrine of discovery is behind it. The United States officially adopted this doctrine into its own legal system in the landmark 1823 Supreme Court case, Johnson versus McIntosh. Chief Justice John Marshall used it to resolve the land dispute, establishing how land ownership worked in the United States. So what did they establish? We read that tribes can only sell land to the federal government or cease or secede land to the United States. So the United States is saying, you don't profit, I do. You know, you can only sell to me. You can't sell your land to anybody but me. And then I could sell it to every foreigner that comes here. That's how quote unquote sovereign an American Indian is on his own land. Truly, ladies and gentlemen, the civilized tribes, they really should be pretty pissed off. But again, if they're foreigners, this is going to be the best they can get anyway. You see, and to me, they're acting like this is the best they can get because they're not trying to fight for anything but more of the same in a republic. A republic is already a created thing. It can't be recreated. It's already owned by the owner and operator. So American Indians is again, they're inheriting a lemon and they're gonna find out that it's a lemon to you, but the creator knows how to make it work for him. That's who it's meant to work for, not American Indians. The United States, again, officially adopted this doctrine of discovery into its own legal system in the landmark 1823 Supreme Court case, Johnson versus McIntosh. Chief Justice John Marshall used it to resolve a land dispute, establishing how land ownership worked in the U.S. How it works is Indians don't own land in the U.S. Diminished tribal rights. Yeah, I just said that. The court ruled that Native Americans did not own the underlying title, the fee simple ownership to their traditional lands. Instead, by virtue of discovery, the United States government held the ultimate legal title. So that's how the United States looks at the land and Indians on it. This is the Republic and how it works. If you want something where you are the authority, you have to create it yourself. You don't recreate a broken system that works against you, and it always will. Uh, we read that already. Right of occupancy. The tribes were left with only a right of occupancy. They could live on the land, but they could not sell it to private citizens or foreign nations, only to the federal government. They want to control our land indefinitely. How it factors into the conversation. Oh, I think this is well. I'm sorry, the doctrine of discovery provides the missing link for understanding the power dynamics in federal Indian law. Justifies federal supremacy. The doctrine of discovery justifies federal supremacy. The doctrine explains why the U.S. government claims exclusive plenary power over tribes. Now, we did note that Clarence Thomas said that the Supreme Court overstepped its bounds by claiming plenary authority. But Peter DeRico has made a video talking about this since then. And he says that it's something that was said, but nothing is being done about it. It was something that Clarence Thomas said, but he's not doing anything to null and void the doctrine of discovery because they didn't say he had to. Um, Pardon, I was sleep talking. They didn't say he had. He doesn't have to. He doesn't have to do anything. He just has to make it look, make it appear that he's trying to do the right thing, but he's not because he just made that statement. And Peter DeRico has already confirmed that they have not done anything to say that they're going to limit their plenary authority. They just said, well, the Constitution doesn't. Darn straight it doesn't. So you've been acting fraudulently outside of the Constitution, is what Clarence Thomas is saying. So it legally positioned the federal government as the landlord and the tribes as tenants. Wow. It limits tribal sovereignty. While the U.S. recognizes that tribes have inherent sovereignty to govern their own people, the doctrine of discovery strips tribes of their external sovereignty, meaning they cannot engage in independent foreign diplomacy or freely trade land on the global market, but the United States can. How can the owners of the land not be able to freely trade with their resources? Well, because the United States is hogging up all your resources, one thing. So this is the laws that we get from the federal government regarding Indians. Okay. And we got to be careful because I'm starting to trail off and talk foolish because I'm tired. It's pretty early in the morning now. It rejects first contact supremacy. Returning to your first question, the doctrine applies to European discovery. It did not grant superior rights to the first native tribe encountered by Europeans. Instead, it was used to diminish the property rights of all indigenous nations equally, whether they were coastal Algonquins or interior Iroquois. We want to say something about this because I think our conversation on writing uh, effectively debunks the idea that Algonquins were coastal. Because how could you have a language only on the coast of the land and the other Indians have none? The civilized tribes area internal. So they're trying to say that the Algonquins were only on the coast and all the land that we really wanted. Thankfully, the civilized tribes had that internal land. It was all Algonquin land, ladies and gentlemen. Because how did we get writing only on? How do you have writing only on the coast of a landmass? Just the coast. Yet we had writing, and you made a reference writing in your dictionary. Why would you rely on coastal? If it was just coastal, then putting Algonquin words in your dictionary would be kind of the point would be mute. It must have been that the language was prevalent for you to put it in your uh, legal dictionary words or in your Webster's dictionary, I should say. It wasn't a legal dictionary. It had to be pretty significant. And it came at a time, well, 1828. Well, yeah, it did come after the Cherokee got their writing. But again, the dictionary itself doesn't mention Cherokee. It did mention the word Algonquin. But I think they've done some jiggy stuff. Dictionary, the 1828 Webster's. Okay. So it says it rejects first contact, but ladies and gentlemen, we know that they married into first contact. So you reject the supremacy, you should have not had a white status from first contact Indians. If you reject their supremacy, you're not fully rejecting it because you made sure that you married into that family. So, yes, the doctrine of discovery will allow you to deny all Indians, as you say, but the doctrine of discovery has been repudiated. So, how will you lie about how it doesn't affect you when it does? That was interesting. I don't recall going over that, but let's read it again. The doctrine of discovery rejects first contact supremacy. Returning to my first question, AI said, the doctrine applies to European discovery. It did not grant superior rights to the first native tribe encountered by Europeans. Instead, it was used to diminish the property rights of all indigenous nations equally, whether they were coastal Algonquins or interior Iroquois. Remember, Iroquois were north, and they found Algonquins in the south, ladies and gentlemen. So they're lying again, trying to make like Iroquois were interior. They weren't interior to the part that the Europeans first found. I don't believe they were interior at all, but in the Roanoke, uh we didn't have any Iroquois down in the southern states or in the southern region, I should say, of Indian land. They were not in the South. I'm sorry. I'm sort of trailing off, so I gotta be careful because I start talking foolish sleep talk. There were no Iroquois behind the Algonquins in the South. That was all Algonquin. The Iroquois were in New York area, New York State area, not New York City. New York City is Algonquin. New York State is more where the Iroquois would have been. But they weren't even there till 80 years later after colonizer. Okay. So again, it rejects first contact supremacy. Returning to your first question, the European, I'm sorry, the doctrine applies to European discovery. It did not grant superior rights to the first native tribe encountered by Europeans. Instead, it was used to diminish the property rights of all indigenous nations equally, whether they were coastal Algonquins or Iroquois. Well, I still feel like they mentioned the civilized more in a favorable kind of setting. So you could say that it diminished property rights of all. Well, it did. But I'm just saying it still seems to favor the civilized tribes, no matter what. In like mention alone, modern impact and repudiation. The doctrine of discovery is not just ancient history. It remains a legally active precedent in the United States. We want to read that again. The doctrine of discovery is not just ancient history, ladies and gentlemen. It remains to this day a legally active precedent in the U.S. court system used to resolve modern property and jurisdictional disputes. So we have a system that goes by the notion that we are these savages that they can steal our land from. So they're legalizing their theft, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. That's why it is active and it's a legally active precedent in the US court system. In 2000, however, it has faced massive backlash. In 2022, Pope Francis and the Vatican formally repudiated the doctrine of discovery, acknowledging that the 15th century papal bulls were manipulated for colonial purposes and did not reflect the equal dignity and rights of American Indians. To help us explore this further, let me know if you would like to see examples of modern Supreme Court cases that still cite the doctrine of discovery, or learn how the Vatican's 2002 repudiation impacts international human rights discussion. Examine how tribes use treaty law to push back against the limitations imposed by this doctrine. So tribes shouldn't use treaty law or any law, in my opinion. Um, examine how tribes use treaty law to push back against limitation and limitations imposed by this doctrine of discovery. Well, treaty laws, as we always say, are also a product of the doctrine of discovery. This whole entire legal system, this English legal system, is property of the United States. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The treaty is a product of the doctrine of discovery, which has crept into the United States laws. None of it is meant to do right by American Indians. Therefore, we must reject it as we establish our own system. It just has to happen. There's no question because this system has already geared itself to basically be our guardian forever, which is really, really pitiful that some group of people would want to do that to another group of people. I think I'm gonna have to say, oh yeah, I am ready to take a break. um, yeah, right now because I'm just babbling, fighting off sleep. So yeah, break is really messed up. Can't even focus later. But yes, we wanted to just take another look at the system that's on the land and know where it came from and know that we cannot be trying to, as American Indians, not taxed. It is not our business to uphold the system. Thanks. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay. First contact, American Indians. So sorry, I'm a little fatigued and I felt like I was talking out of turn, but I do apologize. It's been a long night. Um, thank, thank you once again. Till next time, be safe. Quick greetings. Let us plug our headphones. And once again, quick greetings. Welcome to another video. Thank you for joining us. It's pretty late, so I'm gonna see how far I get in this video. We're going to look at a document we looked at before. We just want to keep it basically on the Constitution and the problems with the Constitution. The main, um, namely, the problem that we never invited an English system to take over our entire landmass. I think when we think logically, have to ask, where on earth do a people surrender every square inch of their land to foreign legal systems, to a foreign entity that becomes the government? And then it's a government where a Jim Crow era is possible. So clearly, this was not the quote unquote business deal that you'll hear many Indians say it was, like a business deal gone bad. No, no, we didn't invite a foreigner to do any business. And again, if it was the case, what kind of business is it when a people sell well, we didn't sell, but when a people lose their entire land, where there's no place for them to have any authority, because literally the whole landmass has been made into states. And so Indians find themselves in the middle of states that are basically setting up a whole legal system around them. And because you don't have land, you're forced to be at the mercy of the state. And then the federal government comes along, emancipates you, and makes you a public debt slave for the entire nation. Now, when you were made into a 14th Amendment debt slave, this is for the debts of the states, yeah, the debts of the citizens. The American Indian is being made as if we owe fees, something that they already took, by the way. I think the logic is to create some imaginary debt so that land seizure seems like the, result of a debt not being paid. But we don't owe foreign invaders anything. This whole entire thing, this is for Indians who want to see what makes this system so much at enmity with what they call people of color, what they call Negroes, what they call Black, what they call African American. Well, the reason why you are discriminated against is because you are a threat to an entity that is seeking to own your land forever. Now, you don't know you're a threat because you've been told you're African. But even after they call you African, they're still seeing you as a threat to their domination, their unlawful domination and seizure of all of your land. There is no place on your own land, American Indian, where you have complete and total authority. Yet they call you a separate nation. But then they say you're domestic dependent. Well, if you took all the land, it would seem that I'm domestic dependent. But what it is I'm the victim of land seizure. You left me nothing. How is this something that is even, how could it be seen as this is something someone would agree to? It simply is not, ladies and gentlemen. It simply is not. So let's look at a document again that we looked at before.